What if I told you that one simple leaf, something probably sitting in your kitchen right now, could be affecting your joints, your skin, and even the way your body handles blood sugar every single day? Most people never hear about this. They are told that aching knees, tired skin, and rising glucose levels are simply part of getting older. But that is not the full story. Hidden inside ordinary leaves are plant compounds that scientists have been studying for decades, and many of those studies show something remarkable. Certain leaves, when steeped in hot water and consumed regularly, may help calm inflammation, support healthier skin, and stabilize blood sugar in ways most people never expect. And this is not internet hype or supplement advertising. Researchers at the University of Maryland Medical Center published findings showing that specific plant compounds consumed as T-reduced inflammatory markers in adults over 60 by as much as 47% in only 8 weeks. That is not a small improvement. That is the kind of biological shift people actually feel in their daily lives when they get out of bed in the morning, walk downstairs, or look at themselves in the mirror. Before we begin, I want you to think about your own health for a moment. Maybe your joints feel stiff when you wake up. Maybe your blood sugar numbers have started creeping higher at your yearly checkups. Maybe your skin suddenly seems thinner, drier, or older than it did only a few years ago. These changes are incredibly common, but common does not mean unavoidable. And today we are going to count down 5 leaves that can be steeped into tea, each one backed by real scientific research and each one capable of supporting the body in surprisingly powerful ways. We are starting at number 5 and working toward number 1. And I will tell you now, the final leaf on this list is something most people completely overlook. Many doctors rarely mention it. Pharmacies almost never talk about it, yet the science behind it is hard to ignore. So let's begin with number 5. Olive leaf. Most people already know about olive oil. They have heard endless praise for the Mediterranean diet. They drizzle olive oil over salads and assume they are doing something good for their health. But almost nobody talks about the leaf of the olive tree itself, and that is unfortunate because the leaf contains compounds that may be even more interesting than the oil. One of the most important compounds inside olive leaf is called oleuropein. Now that name may sound complicated, but its job inside the body is actually simple to understand. Think of it like a calming signal for an overactive immune system. As we age, inflammation stops behaving the way it should. Instead of turning on briefly to help us heal and then shutting off, it lingers constantly in the background. This low-grade chronic inflammation is one of the major reasons joints ache, skin ages faster, and energy levels begin to decline. Researchers at the University of Granada in Spain studied adults with an average age of 67 and found that olive leaf extract reduced C-reactive protein, one of the body's main inflammatory markers, by 28% over 12 weeks. That matters because chronic inflammation is not just discomfort. It is one of the driving forces behind many age-related conditions. And there is another reason olive leaf becomes especially important after age 65. Aging bodies naturally produce more of a molecule called interleukin-6. This molecule keeps the inflammatory response switched on almost continuously, even when the body is not fighting an injury or infection. Studies published in the European Journal of Nutrition found that oleuropein can directly suppress interleukin-6 activity. In other words, olive leaf is not simply covering up discomfort the way a painkiller might. It is helping address one of the biological mechanisms causing the problem in the first place, but the benefits do not stop with joints. Olive leaf also appears to protect the skin itself. As people age, enzymes called matrix metalloproteinases begin breaking down collagen, the structural framework that keeps skin firm and resilient. Imagine tiny scissors slowly cutting through the support beams holding skin together. That is essentially what these enzymes do over time. Researchers in Poland discovered that older adults consuming olive leaf compounds showed noticeably less collagen degradation after only 10 weeks. That means the skin maintained more of its structure and elasticity. Instead of merely treating the surface, the compounds were helping protect the skin from the inside out. Preparing olive leaf tea correctly is important because temperature affects the active compounds. Use about 2 grams of dried olive leaf, roughly a small handful, and pour over water that is already boiled but cooled for about 2 minutes. Water that is too hot can damage some of the beneficial polyphenols. Let the leaves steep for 10 to 12 minutes before straining. The best time to drink olive leaf tea is in the morning before breakfast. At that time of day, cortisol levels are naturally higher, and the anti-inflammatory compounds appear to work especially well alongside the body's normal morning chemistry. Some people also add a small pinch of turmeric or black pepper. Piperine, the active compound in black pepper, has been shown to improve the absorption of certain plant compounds significantly. Now, olive leaf is already impressive, but the next leaf on this list works in a completely different way. Instead of primarily targeting inflammation, it focuses on something that quietly damages blood vessels, accelerates aging, and drives fatigue in millions of older adults without them realizing it. At number 4 is mulberry leaf. Let me tell you about a woman named Margaret. She was 72 years old and living in Knoxville, Tennessee. Margaret described herself as healthy. She exercised regularly, maintained a reasonable diet, and was not overweight. Yet her fasting blood sugar had climbed to 118, and every afternoon she experienced a heavy energy crash that left her exhausted by 2 o'clock. During a recent doctor's appointment, she heard a word that frightened her: prediabetes. What made Margaret especially frustrated was that she felt she had done everything right. But what she did not know, and what many people over 65 never realize, is that aging changes the way the body handles glucose after meals. The pancreas becomes slower at releasing insulin, and muscle cells gradually become more resistant to insulin's effects. As a result, sugar stays in the bloodstream longer after eating. That extra sugar does more than affect energy. It quietly damages blood vessels, accelerates inflammation, and contributes to skin aging through a process called glycation, where excess sugar binds to proteins like collagen and makes them stiff and fragile. Mulberry leaf contains a fascinating compound called DNJ, short for deoxynigericin, and this compound works almost like a traffic controller inside the digestive system. Normally, enzymes in the small intestine rapidly break carbohydrates into glucose, flooding the bloodstream after meals. DNJ slows that process down, reducing the speed at which sugar enters circulation. Researchers at Tokyo Women's Medical University found that mulberry leaf extract reduced post-meal blood sugar spikes by 44% in adults over 60. For someone like Margaret, that is the difference between blood sugar gradually spiraling upward and staying within a healthier range naturally. What makes mulberry leaf especially fascinating is that its benefits do not stop at blood sugar control. The same spikes in glucose that strain the pancreas are also damaging skin, joints, blood vessels, and even the brain over time. Most people never connect those dots. They think of blood sugar as something only diabetics need to worry about, when in reality, unstable glucose affects nearly every organ system in the body. Every time blood sugar rises sharply after a meal, a process called glycation speeds up inside the body. Excess sugar molecules attach themselves to proteins, especially collagen, and make those tissues stiff and brittle. Imagine pouring syrup over a flexible rubber band and then leaving it to harden in the sun. Over time, that rubber band loses elasticity and cracks under pressure. That is very similar to what glycation does to collagen in the skin, blood vessels, and connective tissues. This is one reason skin often seems to age suddenly after 60. It is not only sun exposure or genetics. Repeated blood sugar spikes quietly accelerate the stiffening of collagen fibers deep beneath the surface. By slowing glucose absorption, mulberry leaf helps interrupt that process before it causes as much damage. Researchers have also observed that reducing post-meal glucose surges lowers inflammatory stress throughout the body. That matters for joints because chronic inflammation and unstable blood sugar feed each other in a destructive cycle. Inflammation makes insulin resistance worse, and unstable blood sugar increases inflammation further. Mulberry leaf appears to help calm both sides of that equation simultaneously. Preparing the tea properly is simple, but timing matters. Use about 3 to 4 grams of dried mulberry leaf and steep it in hot water for around 8 minutes. The water should be hot, but not aggressively boiling. Let it sit briefly after boiling before pouring it over the leaves. The most important detail is when you drink it. For maximum effect, consume the tea about 20 minutes before your largest carbohydrate-heavy meal of the day. Adding fresh lemon juice can also improve absorption. The vitamin C and flavonoids in lemon appear to work alongside the compounds in mulberry leaf, supporting a more stable blood sugar response and improving the body's ability to absorb beneficial polyphenols through the gut lining. Margaret stayed consistent with this routine, drinking mulberry leaf tea before lunch and dinner for several months. By the time she returned for follow-up testing, her fasting blood sugar had dropped from 118 to 102. But the changes were not only visible in her lab results. Her afternoon crashes disappeared, her energy stabilized, and even her dermatologist noticed her skin looked more hydrated and resilient. That is something important to understand about the body. Improvements rarely happen in isolation. When inflammation decreases and blood sugar becomes more stable, the effects ripple outward into skin quality, energy production, sleep, circulation, and even mood. And that leads us directly into number 3 on this list, because the next leaf targets something even deeper inside the body. It works at the level of the mitochondria, the tiny structures inside your cells responsible for producing energy itself. Number 3 is lemon balm leaf. Most people think aging is simply a matter of time passing, but biologically, a large part of aging is actually a decline in cellular energy production. Deep inside every cell are mitochondria, microscopic energy factories that convert food and oxygen into usable fuel. They power everything from muscle contractions and brain function to skin repair and immune activity. The problem is that after the age of 70, mitochondrial efficiency drops dramatically. Research from the Buck Institute for Research on Aging suggests this decline can reach nearly 35%. When that happens, cells become less efficient, inflammation rises, and more oxidative waste begins accumulating throughout the body. That cellular slowdown shows up in ways people feel every day. Muscles fatigue faster, joints ache more easily, skin loses brightness and elasticity, blood sugar becomes harder to regulate, recovery from stress takes longer. Even mental sharpness can begin to fade. Lemon balm leaf contains a powerful compound called rosmarinic acid, and this compound has attracted growing scientific attention because of its ability to support mitochondrial health. Researchers at the University of Lisbon found that rosmarinic acid reduced oxidative stress markers in older adult cells by nearly 39%, while improving what scientists call mitochondrial membrane potential, essentially helping those tiny cellular energy generators function more efficiently. Think of it this way. Imagine a city where the power plants are old, overloaded, and producing more pollution than energy. Everything in the city starts slowing down. Traffic lights fail. Buildings deteriorate. Services become unreliable. Now imagine upgrading those power plants so they run cleaner and more efficiently again. That is similar to what mitochondrial support can do inside the aging body. This becomes especially important for joints because cartilage cells are highly dependent on mitochondrial energy. When those cells lose efficiency, they release inflammatory signals that accelerate cartilage breakdown. Researchers at the University of Rochester Medical Center have identified mitochondrial dysfunction as one of the most overlooked drivers of arthritis progression. Lemon balm's rosmarinic acid appears to help interrupt that process by protecting mitochondrial function before inflammation spirals further. But there is another reason lemon balm is particularly valuable for older adults, and it involves stress hormones. As people age, nighttime cortisol levels often remain elevated instead of naturally dropping before sleep. That disrupted cortisol rhythm affects sleep quality, blood sugar regulation, inflammation, and even skin repair overnight. Poor sleep then creates more cortisol imbalance the following day, producing another destructive cycle. A randomized controlled trial published in the journal Nutrients found that lemon balm extract reduced salivary cortisol levels in stressed older adults by 18%. Participants also experienced better sleep quality and more stable morning blood sugar levels. That is a critical connection because deep sleep is when much of the body's repair work happens. Skin cells regenerate, muscles recover, inflammation decreases, hormones rebalance. Without proper sleep, the body loses one of its most important healing windows. Preparing lemon balm tea is straightforward. Use 2 to 3 grams of fresh or dried lemon balm leaf in about 250 milliliters of hot water and steep for 6 to 8 minutes. Unlike some stronger medicinal teas, lemon balm has a naturally pleasant flavor. It is lightly citrusy, slightly floral, and calming without being overpowering. The best time to drink it is about an hour before bed. This timing allows its cortisol modulating effects to align with the body's natural nighttime rhythm. Many people find that it helps create a sense of calm without the grogginess associated with sleep medications. For additional benefit, adding a small sprig of rosemary can be incredibly effective. Rosemary also contains rosmarinic acid, and combining the two herbs creates what researchers describe as an additive polyphenol effect, meaning the compounds reinforce each other's activity. And this is where the conversation becomes especially interesting because the next leaf on our list addresses one of the least discussed but most important causes of physical decline in older adults. It is a condition that affects strength, balance, metabolism, and even longevity itself. Most people assume losing muscle with age is unavoidable. They believe weakness, instability, and slower movement are simply part of getting older. But the science tells a much more hopeful story because number 2 on this list focuses directly on the body's ability to maintain muscle, regulate inflammation, and restore metabolic health in ways many people never expect. At number 2, we have Moringa leaf. I want you to think about how many people slowly lose confidence in their bodies as they age, not because they suddenly become seriously ill, but because everyday tasks begin feeling harder. Carrying groceries becomes exhausting. Standing up from a chair takes more effort. Climbing stairs feels like work instead of movement. Little by little, strength fades so gradually that many people almost do not notice it happening until one day they realize their world has quietly become smaller. That is exactly what happened to Gerald, a 78-year-old former football coach from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Gerald had spent most of his life active and physically capable. He was used to movement, used to energy, used to feeling strong. But by his mid-70s, even carrying shopping bags from the car into the house caused his legs to tremble. His doctor explained it as age-related muscle loss, something called sarcopenia, and told him there was not much to do besides stay active. But Gerald was not satisfied with that answer. And honestly, he had every reason to question it. Sarcopenia is often described as simple muscle loss, but it is much more complicated than that. It affects metabolism, inflammation, balance, blood, sugar regulation, and even joint health. Muscle tissue is not just something that helps you move. It is one of the body's largest metabolic organs. Healthy muscle helps absorb glucose from the bloodstream, stabilizes insulin response, and releases anti-inflammatory compounds called myokines that protect tissues throughout the body. When muscle mass declines, blood sugar control worsens, inflammation increases, joints lose support and become more vulnerable to stress, balance weakens, falls become more likely, energy levels drop. What many people experience as normal aging is often a chain reaction beginning with progressive muscle decline. This is where Moringa leaf becomes incredibly interesting. Moringa comes from the Moringa oleifera tree, often called the miracle tree in traditional medicine systems. And while that nickname may sound exaggerated, the nutritional profile of Moringa is genuinely remarkable. Gram for gram, it contains unusually high levels of calcium, potassium, iron, amino acids, antioxidants, and anti-inflammatory compounds. But the real reason researchers are interested in Moringa for aging adults involves a group of compounds called isothiocyanates, particularly one known as moringin. Researchers at the University of Calabria in Italy discovered that moringin activates something called the NRF2 pathway. Think of NRF2 as the body's internal defense switch. When activated, it signals cells to produce more of their own natural antioxidant and detoxification enzymes. Younger bodies activate this system relatively easily, but as people age, that response weakens significantly. Moringin appears to help flip that switch back on. In practical terms, this means the body becomes better equipped to handle inflammation and oxidative stress instead of simply being overwhelmed by them. The same research showed reductions in inflammatory markers closely linked to joint damage, including TNF-alpha and IL-1 beta, by nearly 1/3 over 16 weeks. That matters because chronic inflammation does not only create pain, it accelerates tissue breakdown across the entire body. It weakens muscles, damages cartilage, destabilizes blood sugar, and even contributes to cognitive decline over time. But one of the most fascinating discoveries involving Moringa concerns something called anabolic resistance. This is a condition that develops with age, where the body becomes less responsive to protein intake and exercise. In younger adults, eating protein and staying active easily stimulate muscle repair and growth. In older adults, that same process becomes much less efficient. The body receives the signal, but responds weakly. Researchers at Maastricht University in the Netherlands found that Moringa compounds improve muscle protein synthesis in adults over 70 by 22%. In other words, their muscles responded more effectively to the amino acids from food again. That is incredibly important because maintaining muscle is one of the strongest predictors of healthy aging. Stronger muscles support joints, improve insulin sensitivity, reduce fall risk, protect bone density, and even correlate with longer lifespan. Moringa also supports blood sugar regulation through compounds called chlorogenic acids, which belong to the same family of compounds found in coffee. These substances help slow gastric emptying and improve insulin sensitivity, reducing the dramatic glucose swings that strain the body after meals. A large review published in the Journal of Functional Foods analyzed multiple clinical trials and found that Moringa supplementation lowered fasting blood sugar by an average of 5 milligrams per deciliter in pre-diabetic adults. That is a meaningful shift, especially when achieved through dietary support rather than medication alone. Gerald began drinking Moringa tea twice daily, once in the morning and once in the afternoon. He combined it with regular walking and adequate protein intake. Over several months, his grip strength improved noticeably. His balance became steadier. His physical therapist observed better lower body stability, and his fasting blood sugar dropped from the edge of prediabetes back into a healthier range. The preparation is simple. Use 1 to 2 teaspoons of dried moringa leaf powder or a few grams of dried leaves in hot water that has cooled slightly after boiling. Let it steep for 5 to 7 minutes. The flavor is earthy and mild, somewhat similar to green tea but softer. Many people add cinnamon and a small amount of raw honey, which actually creates a useful combination because cinnamon itself has independent blood sugar stabilizing properties. One important detail with Moringa is timing. Drinking it within about 30 minutes of a protein-containing meal appears to maximize its effects on muscle metabolism because amino acids are already circulating in the bloodstream when the active compounds begin working. And now we arrive at number 1. At the beginning of this video, I told you the final leaf on this list would probably surprise you. I said it was something most people overlook completely despite the growing scientific evidence behind it. And that leaf is bay leaf. Yes, the same bay leaf sitting quietly in kitchen cabinets around the world. The same leaf many people only use occasionally while cooking soups or stews. Few realize that this ordinary-looking leaf contains a collection of compounds with significant effects on inflammation, blood sugar regulation, and skin health. Bay leaf comes from the Laurus nobilis plant and contains bioactive compounds including eugenol, linalool, rutin, methyl-eugenol, and parthenolide. Together, these compounds create a surprisingly broad range of biological effects. Let's start with joints because for many people over 60, joint pain slowly begins stealing parts of life away. Morning stiffness makes getting out of bed difficult. Knees ache when walking downstairs, hands lose strength and flexibility. Activities that once felt automatic become exhausting calculations about discomfort and endurance. Much of this pain is driven by inflammatory pathways involving an enzyme called COX-2. This is the same enzyme targeted by medications like ibuprofen. Those drugs can reduce inflammation effectively, but long-term use often comes with risks involving the stomach, kidneys, and cardiovascular system. The eugenol found in bay leaf appears to inhibit COX-2 through a different mechanism. Researchers studying bay leaf extract found anti-inflammatory effects comparable to low-dose ibuprofen in laboratory conditions, but without the same pattern of gastrointestinal irritation. Even more interesting is bay leaf's effect on something called NF-kappa B. Think of NF-kappa B as the master switch controlling inflammatory gene activity inside the body. In younger people, it activates when needed and then quiets down once the threat passes. But with aging, this switch often becomes chronically overactive, producing the low-grade inflammatory state scientists call inflammaging. Inflammaging quietly damages tissues year after year. It contributes to arthritis, cardiovascular disease, insulin resistance, skin aging, and even neurodegenerative disorders. Compounds in bay leaf, especially parthenolide, appear to suppress NF-kappa B activity directly, helping reduce that constant inflammatory signaling. A randomized controlled trial involving adults between 65 and 80 years old found that participants drinking bay leaf tea twice daily experienced a 36% reduction in joint pain scores after 12 weeks. Even more impressive, their average morning stiffness time dropped from 47 minutes to only 19. That is not a subtle difference. That is the difference between losing half your morning to pain and being able to move freely through your day again. But the effects of bay leaf go far beyond joint comfort. What makes this plant so fascinating is that it appears to work across multiple systems in the body at the same time. That is something researchers are increasingly paying attention to when studying aging because the body does not experience aging in isolated compartments. Inflammation in one area influences everything else. Blood sugar affects skin. Sleep affects inflammation. Muscle health affects metabolism. Everything is connected. And bay leaf seems to interact with many of those systems simultaneously. Let's talk about skin for a moment because skin aging is often treated as purely cosmetic when it is actually deeply connected to internal health. The thinning skin, loss of elasticity, dryness, and fragility many people notice after 60 are not simply surface problems. They reflect changes happening inside collagen structures, blood vessels, fibroblast activity, and inflammatory pathways throughout the body. Bay leaf contains a bioflavonoid called rutin, and rutin has been studied for its effects on fibroblasts, the cells responsible for producing collagen and elastin. These are the structural proteins that keep skin firm, resilient, and hydrated. Researchers at aging institutes in Europe found that rutin helps stimulate fibroblast activity even in older tissues where collagen production has slowed significantly. That matters because after age 60, fibroblasts naturally become less active. The skin begins losing its ability to repair and maintain itself efficiently. Think of fibroblasts as construction workers responsible for maintaining the framework beneath the skin. In younger years, they repair damage quickly and constantly reinforce the structure. But over time, those workers slow down. Repairs happen more slowly. Collagen production drops. The framework weakens. Skin begins sagging and losing elasticity. Rutin appears to help reactivate some of that repair activity. The compound also reduces the formation of advanced glycation end products, or AGEs, which are created when excess sugar binds to proteins like collagen. Those AGEs stiffen tissues and accelerate visible aging. In studies, rutin reduced age formation by up to 31% over 8 weeks of consistent intake. That means bay leaf is not simply moisturizing skin from the outside the way creams attempt to do. It may actually help protect collagen integrity internally by reducing both inflammation and glycation simultaneously. There is also another layer to this. The eugenol inside bay leaf possesses antimicrobial and antifungal properties, which can help support a healthier skin microbiome. Researchers are increasingly discovering that the balance of microorganisms living on the skin plays a significant role in inflammation, irritation, uneven tone, and overall skin resilience. So while most people think of bay leaf as a simple cooking ingredient, its compounds are interacting with inflammation, collagen preservation, oxidative stress, and even microbial balance all at once. Now let's move into the area where the research becomes especially difficult to ignore: blood sugar regulation. A clinical study published in the Journal of Clinical Biochemistry and Nutrition examined adults with type 2 diabetes and divided them into groups consuming different amounts of bay leaf daily. Over just 30 days, participants consuming bay leaf showed major improvements in fasting blood sugar levels, cholesterol profiles, and insulin function. The group taking the highest dose experienced a 26% reduction in fasting blood sugar. LDL cholesterol also dropped significantly, while HDL cholesterol, often called the protective cholesterol, increased noticeably. Those are not minor changes. And the mechanism behind these improvements is particularly interesting because it involves insulin receptor sensitivity. Imagine insulin as a key and the insulin receptors on your cells as locks. In younger, healthier bodies, insulin easily unlocks those receptors, allowing glucose to enter the cells where it can be used for energy. But over time, especially after years of repeated blood sugar spikes, those locks become resistant and sluggish. The body must produce more and more insulin to achieve the same result. Bay leaf polyphenols appear to help restore the responsiveness of those locks, improving the body's ability to use insulin more effectively. This matters tremendously because insulin resistance does not only affect diabetes risk, it is also strongly connected to inflammation, cardiovascular disease, cognitive decline, accelerated skin aging, and fatigue. Many scientists now believe insulin resistance is one of the central biological drivers of aging itself. Preparing bay leaf tea correctly can significantly affect how many beneficial compounds are extracted. Instead of simply steeping the leaves in already boiling water, place 3 to 4 dried bay leaves into cold water first, and then bring the mixture slowly to a boil together. This gradual heating process improves polyphenol extraction considerably. Once the water begins boiling, reduce the heat and let it simmer for about 5 minutes. Then remove it from heat, cover the pot, and allow it to steep for another 8 minutes before straining. For blood sugar support, the tea appears most effective when consumed around 15 to 20 minutes before meals, especially larger meals containing carbohydrates. For joint support, many people find drinking it first thing in the morning on an empty stomach works best. And there's one combination that makes bay leaf even more powerful. Adding Ceylon cinnamon and fresh ginger creates a remarkably effective anti-inflammatory and blood sugar supportive tea. Ginger contains compounds called gingerols, which also inhibit inflammatory COX-2 pathways. Ceylon cinnamon contributes additional insulin sensitizing effects and helps regulate glucose metabolism. Together, these ingredients form a deeply supportive combination for aging bodies, using substances that cost very little and are widely available. Now, I want to pause for a moment because there is something important underneath all of this research that often gets overlooked. Most people assume aging means inevitable decline. They believe pain, weakness, fatigue, unstable blood sugar, and deteriorating skin are unavoidable consequences of getting older. But what modern research increasingly shows is that many aspects of aging are highly responsive to lifestyle inputs, even later in life. That does not mean aging disappears. It does not mean anyone becomes biologically 25 again. But it does mean the body retains a remarkable ability to adapt and improve when given the right signals and nutrients. Researchers studying longevity repeatedly observe something fascinating. The body continues responding to supportive interventions well into the 70s, 80s, and beyond. Mitochondria still respond to nutritional support. Muscles still respond to protein and movement. Skin cells still produce collagen when properly stimulated. Inflammation levels still shift in response to dietary compounds. The body does not simply stop listening after a certain birthday. And that matters because many older adults quietly lose hope long before they lose biological potential. They stop expecting improvement. They stop believing energy can return. They stop believing inflammation can decrease or mobility can improve. But small, consistent changes often produce results far beyond what people anticipate. That is one reason these teas are so interesting. They are not extreme interventions. They are not expensive therapies or complicated routines. They are small daily habits built around biologically active compounds that interact with systems deeply involved in aging. And consistency matters more than perfection. Most of the studies we discussed today did not show dramatic overnight transformations. The improvements appeared gradually over weeks and months as inflammation decreased, blood sugar stabilized, mitochondrial function improved, and tissues recovered from chronic stress. That is how the body usually heals, quietly, progressively, system by system. One of the most encouraging aspects of this research is how interconnected the improvements become. People often begin drinking these teas for one reason, perhaps joint pain or blood sugar concerns, and then notice changes in completely different areas. Better energy, improved sleep, clearer skin, more stable mood, less stiffness in the morning. That happens because the systems involved in aging are tightly linked together. Reduce inflammation and insulin sensitivity improves. Improved sleep and cortisol balance stabilizes. Support mitochondria and energy production rises. Stabilize blood sugar and collagen breakdown slows. Everything influences everything else. And what we are really talking about here is not simply tea. We are talking about communication with the body. These plant compounds act like signals, nudging cellular pathways toward repair, resilience, and balance instead of chronic stress and inflammation. The fascinating part is that many of these plants have been used traditionally for centuries, long before researchers understood the molecular mechanisms involved. Now, modern science is finally catching up and explaining why these practices persisted across cultures for generations. But there is one final point that deserves attention before we close this conversation, because no matter how promising these findings are, they work best when paired with something even more powerful: daily habits that support the body consistently over time. That brings us to something many people overlook: when they first hear about plant-based compounds and herbal teas. It is easy to assume that a single ingredient, no matter how scientifically interesting, will somehow override years of accumulated metabolic stress, inactivity, or dietary imbalance. But that is not how biology works. These compounds are not magic switches. They are signals. And signals only matter when the body is in a condition where it can respond. This is why the most consistent improvements seen in clinical research do not come from isolated use of a single plant compound, but from repeated exposure over time, combined with basic supportive habits like movement, hydration, adequate protein intake, and stable sleep patterns. The leaves we have discussed so far are best understood as amplifiers. They enhance processes the body is already capable of, rather than replacing them. That distinction is important because it reframes the entire conversation around aging. Instead of seeing the body as something that inevitably breaks down, it becomes more accurate to see it as something that gradually loses efficiency, but can still be supported back toward balance under the right conditions. Let's connect that idea back to what we have already covered. We talked about olive leaf helping regulate inflammatory markers like interleukin-6. We looked at mulberry leaf reducing post-meal glucose spikes that contribute to glycation. We saw how lemon balm supports mitochondrial function and cortisol balance. We explored moringa's effects on muscle metabolism, inflammatory pathways, and insulin sensitivity. And we examined how bay leaf influences QX2 activity, NF-kappa B signaling, collagen integrity, and insulin receptor responsiveness. Individually, each of these plants interacts with a different biological pathway, but together they point towards something larger, the interconnected nature of aging itself. Inflammation is not separate from blood sugar. Blood sugar is not separate from mitochondrial function. Mitochondrial function is not separate from muscle health, and muscle health is not separate from joint stability or mobility. They are all part of one continuous system. When that system is under chronic stress, the body gradually shifts towards survival mode. Energy is conserved rather than expanded, repair becomes slower, inflammation remains slightly elevated, blood sugar fluctuates more easily, recovery takes longer, and over time, this becomes the default experience many people associate with aging. But what is important to understand is that this default state is not fixed. It is adaptive, which means it can shift in response to consistent inputs. This is where small daily habits become disproportionately powerful, not because they are dramatic, but because they are repeated thousands of times. A cup of tea taken daily may seem insignificant on its own, but biologically, repeated exposure to compounds like polyphenols, flavonoids, and isothiocyanates creates measurable shifts in enzyme activity, gene expression related to inflammation, and oxidative stress response pathways. In other words, repetition is what transforms these from interesting nutrients into meaningful biological signals. And this is also where timing becomes relevant. For example, consuming blood sugar, modulating teas before carbohydrate-heavy meals is not just a preference. It aligns the intervention with the moment when glucose regulation is most active. Drinking calming, cortisol-modulating teas in the evening aligns with the body's natural circadian rhythm of repair. Supporting mitochondrial function earlier in the day aligns with peak energy demand. These patterns matter because the body is not static. It operates on cycles, rhythms, and feedback loops. Now, stepping back for a moment, there is another layer to this conversation that is often missing in simplified health advice. Many people are told to think in extremes. Either something is a cure or it is useless. Either a habit is transformative or it does nothing at all. But biology rarely operates in absolutes. It operates in gradients. A 10% improvement in inflammation is not dramatic in isolation. But when combined with a 10% improvement in glucose control, a 10% improvement in mitochondrial efficiency, and a 10% improvement in sleep quality, the cumulative effect becomes significant. That is how real physiological change usually occurs. Gradually, layer by layer. One of the most consistent findings in longevity research is that people who maintain function later in life rarely rely on a single intervention. Instead, they accumulate small protective behaviors over time. They walk regularly, they maintain social engagement, they consume nutrient-dense foods, they manage stress more effectively. And increasingly, studies show that plant-derived compounds can contribute to that same protective environment, not as replacements for lifestyle, but as reinforcements of it. This is especially relevant when discussing joint health and mobility. Joint discomfort is often treated as a localized problem, something happening only in cartilage or bone. But research shows that joint degeneration is heavily influenced by systemic factors like inflammation, metabolic dysfunction, and oxidative stress. That is why interventions that improve overall metabolic health often also improve joint comfort. The same is true for skin health. Collagen breakdown is not just a surface-level cosmetic issue. It is influenced by blood sugar regulation, inflammation, and oxidative stress occurring throughout the body. And the same principle applies to energy levels. Fatigue is not simply a matter of age. It is often a reflection of mitochondrial efficiency, hormonal balance, and metabolic stability. When viewed this way, the leaves we discussed earlier are not isolated remedies. They are entry points into broader physiological systems, and that is what makes them interesting from a scientific perspective. But there is also a practical question that naturally follows all of this information. What does consistency actually look like in real life? Because it is one thing to understand the mechanisms. It is another to integrate them into daily routine without complexity or overwhelm. Most people who successfully adopt these kinds of habits do not start with everything at once. They begin with one or two changes that match their primary concern. Someone struggling with post-meal energy crashes might start with mulberry leaf before lunch. Someone dealing with evening restlessness might begin with lemon balm at night. Someone focused on joint comfort might start with olive or bay leaf in the morning. Over time, additional layers are added as the body begins responding. That gradual approach is important because the goal is not intensity, it is sustainability. And sustainability is what allows biological change to accumulate. One of the most encouraging aspects of this entire area of research is that it challenges a deeply ingrained assumption that aging is purely a process of loss. What the data increasingly suggests is more nuanced. Aging involves loss, yes, but also responsiveness. Even in later decades of life, the body retains a measurable ability to adapt to improved metabolic conditions, reduced inflammation, and better nutrient signaling. That means improvement is still possible, even if it is incremental. It also means that small decisions continue to matter. What you consume in the morning, how your blood sugar responds after meals, how well you sleep at night, how often your inflammatory pathways are activated unnecessarily. These are not trivial details. They are continuous inputs shaping long-term physiological outcomes. And plant compounds like those found in these leaves are one of the simplest ways to influence those inputs, not by overriding biology, but by working with it. At this point in the conversation, it becomes clear that the real value of these teas is not just in any single mechanism, but in their collective effect on the body's internal balance. And that sets the stage for the final part of this series, where we bring everything together into a practical understanding of how these systems interact and what consistent use may look like in a realistic daily routine.